Okay, today is August 4th, 2018, and this is a subject concerning what I've tried so far. Well, it's hard to just give that in a sentence about what I'm talking about, or what subject it is. So um, when you hear this through the end, then uh, you'll understand what I'm talking about. This is the first part is a brief history on what I've tried. And this is around the age of 20, I started going to therapy. This was maybe 1968 or so. And I felt a need to work out some things in my heart and mind because of all the trauma during my growing up years up through high school. It was extremely difficult. Parents fighting and kidnapping, and parents running away with kids, and gosh, the court cases went on for so many years and such. And through the years, 50 years in fact, that have followed, because now I am 70, I went through so many counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, some mediocre and some were of the best, and groups and self-help books and books on psychology, psychiatry, discussions, many thousands of discussions, many with my late Aunt Cleo, a child psychologist, and with my sister, a clinical psychologist. And this went on year upon year upon year, over 50 years, and went through some religions and philosophies and Eastern practices, etc. So many different types of things, I really can't remember them all. And in addition, and I have spent literally every day 1 to probably 2, 3 hours average every day of my life since then, 1968, with myself, going inside, sitting or laying, and poring over and trying to resolve things inside myself. And I thought I was working them out, and I did work out some things. Now, at the same time as I was spending these many hours every single day, at the same time I was also a nature and an environmental lover, a regular businessman in construction, a community college teacher of math and physics at Clackamas Community College in Clackamas, Oregon, right outside of Portland, Oregon. I had many hobbies: photography, hiking, soccer, writing, and I had many experiences, of which some people might call some of these mystical, and some people, others, might call some experiences religious, and some might call others just psychological phenomena. I just call them experiences that I've had. And if I ever get to the place where I can say about life, I understand, then I may know the significance of these experiences. See my website, concernforpeople.info, 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 under the main heading, The Brain. Now, the depth and breadth of a transformational and a developmental process that was initiated after accepting or attempting to accept faith in Christ in 2016, and the subsequent working of the Holy Spirit, which, if you ever know what that is, if you don't know what that is, this is just going to be Greek to you, but this reached the depths and breadths of my heart and mind. There are no words to describe what has happened or happened. I have in the rest of my website on concernforpeoples.net, that's plural, concernforpeoples.net, reported on all of these things, and you can read on the website all of that stuff. And this was in order to leave some evidence and of what had transpired and I reported on, and to make it more visible. Now, on Idris Shah and Sufism, I asked someone maybe at, I think it was Octagon Press, sometime about 1982, because I'd run across some books of his about how to find out more about Sufism. And they replied to me to read all his works. He had quite a number of books of collected stories, teaching stories from the Middle East that he accumulated, that the Sufis had passed down for generations and centuries. And I was in the process, I'd read all those that I could find, but then I developed the bipolar condition, the bipolar disorder. And that turned my life upside down. I mean, it sidetracked me vigorously until 2017. It was a terrible period of my life, adjusting and handling being bipolar. It's very difficult. Medication was turned out to work pretty good. And about 4 or 5 months ago, I rediscovered Idris Shah's material. And now that I have some stability, I wish to resume finding out what he is talking about. And up to date, today, in this process a couple of months ago, I ran across a Rumi saying that said, "This silence, this moment, every moment, if it is genuinely inside you, brings you what you need. Live in silence." End of quote. I have attempted to adopt silence, quote, or, quote, listening, or, quote, observing and experiencing and seeing what changes might be made on the inside for some things and how to make them, if I can figure out how. I began to see and experience many and various things inside, how things work, some very difficult to see or to experience or to tolerate, even to this day. Some I can get used to seeing. While there are many interesting things on the inside to experience and see, they can be very difficult to describe in words. And you can read some of this on the website that I have, concernforpeople.info, under the brain, about many things about navigating inside one's brain and mind beyond words. And if you want to really know yourself and what's happening inside, you're going to have to learn to navigate internally without using words. You can try that out and develop an ability to do that. Anyway, psychology, etc., due to their present nature, can limit one's understanding. Psychology, psychiatry, and therapy, it's all based on talking. You know, if somebody commits a murder or do this or do that, has a gambling problem, or they send them to therapy. If somebody has a mental illness, they send them to therapy, and it's talking and talking and talking. Therapy doesn't do any good for a mental illness. And it will be, and you can see my video on the double helix also on this website, concernforpeople.info, under the brain, under experience double helix, that at some point, you know, there was a time in medicine, physical medicine, when they bloodlet. They let blood out of people's body for everything. I mean, you had pneumonia, you had the flu, you had diabetes, you had cholera, whatever issue, whatever you had, they let blood. They did that 80-90% of the time. These doctors were trained, and this was the uh, extent of the knowledge at that point. But now um, you can see what's happening. We're modifying genes and all kinds of uh, MRIs and CAT scans and all kinds of advanced, we think advanced at this point, medicine. And bloodletting, is no longer used, except for there is one or two isolated uses when it is the appropriate thing to take blood out of a person's body, but only very minimal things happen like that, that particular disease condition. And psychology, psychiatry, therapy, all this talking will be just like bloodletting was to physical medicine. In the future, we're going to see that treating mental illness will be a matter of altering the DNA in specific locations within the brain that are causing that mental dysfunction. And therapy, talking will not be used like it is today at all. Talking will be useful in some instances. For instance, when there's a temporary problem, that somebody has an emotional problem dealing with loss of job, a loved one, or that kind of thing. That's a different situation. But in terms of mental illness, the various molecules will be manipulated in the brain to go to specific physical locations with the brain that are the sites of what is causing the dysfunction in the mental illness. Anyway, getting back to what I've tried, a couple of weeks ago, I saw another Rumi verse that said, "The door to your cell is open. Why do you stay inside?" Unquote. So I began looking and sniffing around in, quote, silence to find the door or a door. But with all this clutter inside, how can I see the door? Where is it? And what is it? I think there's an important thing, and it's probably one of the most important things that has ever happened in my life. And for so many decades, as I mentioned, been working on things internally. I had this, I called it my black hole. I mean, it was just like a huge sinkhole in the center of me, and where no light came out of it. And it motivated me to do things that weren't good for me, and make poor decisions, and I just tried to diffuse it and resolve things and worked on it, and I just never seemed to make any progress with it. I mean, and this went on for some decades, so this was no small deal. But very curious, about 9 months ago, I got up one morning about 2 a.m., and as usual, I kind of checked around inside, see how things were, what was going on, and the black hole wasn't there. There was no warning. It was just gone. There was no residue, not even a molecule of it left. And I wasn't elated. It was just like I'd had an overcoat on, and I got up and I no longer had an overcoat on. I no longer needed an overcoat. I felt fine. I didn't feel at a loss or anything. It was just it was just as though it never existed. And I cannot figure out what happened to it. And this was 9 months ago, and there's never been a shred of of it at all. It's a real mystery. I mean, the years I spent in therapy and alone 2 or 3 hours a day trying to resolve matters, and one day it's gone. I mean, really, I simply don't know. Well, wrapping things up, finally, where things stand today. This is October 25th, 2018. Someone recently asked me, why did you do this or that about my life, and why did you say this or that? Um, and I guess how does one sum up a life in a sentence? How does one explain things briefly? It's taken out of one's life and focused on something without giving context in the entire life. Some people's lives are like giant, massive, tall sequoia trees. That's their identity. That's who they are. You can see them. Some people, like myself, are more like lichens. Uh, I appear in one location as a certain kind of lichen, and I appear in another spot as a different kind of lichen, and yet another in another spot. And so if somebody says, well, why are you like this and why are you like that over there? I mean, this is a little contradictory. I mean, what what's going on? Why don't you explain yourself to us? Yet, with all these different appearances or faces, public faces and appearances, I am still just one, just as the giant sequoia is just one also. It's then a case of the proverbial elephant in the dark, perhaps. One has to feel around and get to know all the different aspects of the trunk, the legs, the tail, the belly, the ears. And when you get all that information together, then you can figure out what it really is. For myself, one would have to read, etc., and view videos and books, etc., of all that I have written on all my 3 websites and books. Uh, to start, one can see at the website concernforpeople.net, and there are references there to the books and other websites. And it would take probably 3 days or so to go through everything. But that is what's necessary in my case. You, if you look at just one website or just one page and say, "Oh, he's this or he's that," it's just not. It's just not. It's just not adequate. But it's important to note that on each website, under the Home or Welcome menu heading, one can see the page called About This Site. And in that page, it is said that all my writings and such are just cairns. That is, markers that someone passed this way before. And sometimes these cairns are used to mark a trail. And as far as my things are concerned, I would rather they be carns than obelisks. But having been through all those, uh, all that material, um, then one would probably sit back and take stock and then see what questions and also what form of questions that might arise. Specifically, someone mentioned, what about my faith in Christ and being born again and all that on the website concernforpeoples.net. Again, this is, I mentioned that the everything on everything are just cards, and I'm not there anymore. But I was legitimately there. I was there, and there are the carn to show that I was. Now, faith was necessary, just as a cocoon is necessary for the butterfly, so it can undergo its metamorphosis. It needs this shell. But when the butterfly emerges and takes flight, it no longer has any use for the cocoon. And I no longer have faith. I did not say I was faithless, but I just don't make use of faith anymore. But faith will always be important to people. Now, instead of faith, I simply would say, I am. I don't misinterpret that as blasphemy. I'm just stating a fact. Something has occurred. The butterfly has flown.